Well, good evening. My name is Mike Funk, City Manager here for the City of Minnetonka. Welcome on a cold, kind of rainy day, and it's almost sad to think that at 6 o'clock it's getting dark. But so thank you for spending some time with us here this evening. Notice on the overhead it says community conversation and not community lecture. And so, thank you. So we as staff, we have about 45 slides in our presentation here this evening. So we want to work through those as quickly as we can and give you information. And certainly as part of the community conversation portion of this is to really leave time at the end so we can have some dialogue and some interaction and answer questions that any of you may have. Before we get going, just a couple of housekeeping items. First off, restrooms. For those that may not be familiar with our facility, just out the door and to your right, you'll find men's and women's restrooms. Also want to note that we started promptly at 6:30 and we advertised to be done at 8. So we will end at 8, not 8:05. So we're going to try to keep things moving and get you on your way as well. When you sat down, third thing I want to mention, you see some note cards. And so we'll have a presentation. I'm going to introduce some of our guest speakers here in a minute. So if you have questions, save those at the end. So we're going to go through our presentation as staff, and then those note cards are for really kind of two things. One is if you want to ask a question and you're a little timid to raise your hand and ask here, certainly write your question down, your name, your phone number, and we will answer those. If not tonight, we will reach out and answer those at another time. So do that, and when we get to the end, if you have questions and you think of a question, write that down throughout the next 45 or so minutes to remind yourself, and then again, we'll take questions at the end. Last thing is refreshments. So we've got some goodies in the back of the room, so some cookies and some sugar to keep you energized here after dinner, and coffee and some other refreshments. So with that, let's go ahead and get rolling. So again, my name is Mike Funk, City Manager, and here's our agenda for this evening. I'll have just a couple more opening remarks. I have 6 slides, and for those that know me, 6 slides could take a half hour, but I will, again, move quickly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just general overview of the city's structure, our roles, city council roles, my role as a city manager, the role of our police chief. I'll talk a little bit about our budget and general fund. Then I'm going to introduce our chief of police, Scott Borbroom. He will talk a little bit about police operations. Then he'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Jason Tate. He's going to talk about technology and training and how that integrates into our operations. And then after that, Gareth Shirk will talk about our Minnetonka crime data. So we'll get some data, and Gareth is our crime analysis supervisor. I always enjoy listening to Gareth. He's quite phenomenal in the work that he does. And then Chief Scott Borbroom will end up the remarks this evening and turn it over into our question and answer period. So that's our format here this evening. Just to kick it off, and a little bit about who we are as a government and who we are as a city. And I tried to give this information a little bit during our Minnetonka Academy. Has anyone ever attended our Minnetonka Academy? Hey, we got some graduates, so thank you. So some of this you might have seen before. I always think it's important to really explain our role here at our government and our roles here at the City of Minnetonka, because not all governments are created equal. So City of Minnetonka does operate differently than some other cities. So I think that's always important to point out how we operate as a city, because that does fit in then to our operations. So up on the slide is, and I had to double check, there are 2 different types of government structures in the state of Minnesota. Again, I want to try to keep this really quick, so if you point in or hone in onto the red colored font, Home Rule Charter Cities. So of the 853 so cities in the state of Minnesota, Minnetonka is considered a Home Rule Charter City. And there are about 107 cities that are classified by the state legislature. So really the state legislature and our state ordinances, the state statutes really drive who we are as an organization. Then there's also types of forms of administrative organizations. So really when you break down the types of government, again, if you hone in on that red colored font, we are a city manager style of government. There are roughly 19 cities in the state of Minnesota that operate like the City of Minnetonka. So I'm a city manager. The most common form of government is the one that's listed up top, and that is a weak mayor council, where there's a city administrator. So maybe you've heard that from other cities. There's a city administrator form of government, there's a city manager form of government. To spare you a lot of details here this evening, I'll briefly talk about what that looks like in an upcoming slide. So the city manager form of government, when you think of your mayor and council, really kind of equate that to business, like a publicly owned business where you have a board of directors. Our city council acts like a board of directors. As a city manager, I'm the CEO of the city. So really hope that kind of illustrates for you our style of government in terms of the council role, city manager, and then our staff. This is our organizational structure. Again, was first and foremost, and the top one on that chart is our community, and that's our residents, you, our business community, and all the folks that live here and pay taxes here in the city of Minnetonka. You all elect a mayor and council, and in 2 weeks from today, you're going to be electing for council members. Our 4 ward council members are up for re-election this year. We have 7 total. Our 4 ward members, again, are up this November. So again, you'll be hopefully going to this is my plug for voting. So hopefully you go to the if you haven't voted already, go out in 2 weeks and make sure you vote for our elected offices. So with the mayor and council, what they do is they hire a city manager, and that, of course, that's me. And then with the hiring of the city manager, you'll see, or noted up on this slide, is our 8 departments. On the very left-hand side of that, you see police, fire, public works, administrative services, community development, finance, legal, and recreation. So those are the departments that I supervise as city manager. And it really kind of helps set the stage for, as I turn this over to Chief Boerboom, the chief works with me, and then really working through our city council. Just to give you a sense of the size of our organization, we have, again, those 8 departments, about 270 full-time staff, generally 300 to 350 seasonal, just depends on the time of year, our seasonal staff. And then for elections, we hire election judges. And given the year, it can range anywhere from 300 to 400 election judges. So at any given time, we could have anywhere between 600 and 900 folks on our payroll. So that gives you, again, the sense of the size of our organization. This slide really illustrates major roles. And for the mayor and council, I'll just briefly speak about the mayor. Again, we're a weak mayor system. And so unlike what you might see with Duluth, St. Paul, or even Minneapolis, they're a much different form of government. And if you notice on that previous slide, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth are a strong mayor form of government. And so those mayors have a lot more power. You probably see that in the Star Tribune if you follow. If you read the Star Tribune, you might see a lot about Jacob Frey. We're different. We're a weak mayor system where our mayor has 1 vote, just like the other council members. And so for the mayor, does not have any more authority or power than any of your other 6 council members. It's 1 vote. And really what you see the mayor is he's really the official spokesperson of the city. He presides over the meetings. He holds the gavel during meetings. And then transitioning to the council, they really have legislative powers. And really what we talk about with our city council, and we have some here this evening, is what their role is decision makers when it comes to public policy. What are those public policy items that they decide on? It's our strategic profile, our mission, our vision, our values. We're in the middle of our budget season, as they call it, so the council gets really involved in the final budget that's approved, the tax levy that's approved. They also adopt ordinances and resolutions as a matter of policy. Ordinances then are our city code. So that's where our council gets really involved in establishing policy, is through those action items. Our council also has authority and control over contracts the city might sign in excess of $175,000. And I'll get to that number here in a second as well. And then a lot of items that might come before the council are development related. Some projects that often you might see, whether it's apartment buildings, there's Walser Kia is a big one that's been on our agenda recently. And so that's really kind of give you a sense of the roles and responsibilities for mayor and council. Then for myself as city manager, again, I'm hired by the council. The council has 1 person that they have authority over, and that's the city manager. And so the council does not have authority over our staff. That is the role of the city manager as CEO in our organization. So all hiring and firing authority is through my office. I carry out the directives of the council. So when the council adopts a policy, makes a policy decision, then it's really up to me and the staff, my staff, to carry out those day-to-day operations. I make recommendations to the city council. I prepare the annual budget with our staff, and so our finance director and all of our directors here at the city, including Chief Boerboom, we work together in preparing that annual budget that we present to the city council for their consideration. I am also then the chief purchasing agent for the city. And so anything under 175,000 is in my authority to approve. So I have that authority through the city code and through statute in that regard. The one thing I do point out, it takes a majority, 4 council members, to really make a decision. And what I mean by that and why that's important is one council member can't call me and say, hey, Mike, do this. A council member can't call our chief and say, hey, chief, do that. And so that's the structure of our government, is really our council working through myself and me working with, again, our directors. And then for our chief, and this is true of our 8 directors, and that is they have authority as well. For Scott Borboom, he manages and develops and implements departmental goals, initiatives, and work plans. The chief is responsible for day-to-day operations. This is really a key one, and that is he establishes procedures, protocols, and internal operational policies. I think if I asked the chief, if you printed out their operational manual, it's 400 pages. It's a big 3-ring binder. So all those policies and procedures within the police department are established by the chief. Identifies and recommends department needs and resources, and a lot of that comes through our budgeting process, and then overall provides leadership within the department and holds our staff accountable. Just a couple more slides. So a little bit about our taxes. When you look at our police department, this graph illustrates our general fund. Over on your left-hand side of the graph, you see public safety. Our general fund's about 50 million, and public safety consumes about 44% of that. That's very common. So it doesn't matter if you look at probably Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Plymouth, Edina, some of our bigger neighbors. That's a really common, very common place to be, is that 40 to 45% being spent on public safety. I won't go around the rest of that pie graph. You can see where those other services and breakdowns occur. So diving a little bit deeper into public safety, because that is police and fire. So I'm going to break down police for you just for a second. Hopefully all of you can see that and not squint. I don't see too many people squinting hard. So this dates back to 2019. So really wanted to show this as a way to illustrate, I think, support of the council when it comes to the requests from staff, myself, and the chief when we present annual budgets to our council. Going back to 2019, police department operations were $10,174,000. And then as we go into next year, 2024, the request is $14,791,000. So it's about a 45% increase over that period of time. Now it depends on maybe your perspective. You might say, for the budget hawks, might say, well, that's a lot of costs going up. And others might say, well, good, I'm glad we're investing in police. And so that's oftentimes the balance we face, is making sure we fund, recognize the need, support the need, make sure that our chief and our law enforcement officials have the tools and the resources they need to be effective and efficient in their operations. And then my last slide is, really just want to stress on you, is what we do to position for the future. My goal as city manager, and our departments would say the same thing, our mayor and council would say the same thing, and that is, we try not to be reactive. We want to be proactive. And part of that is making sure we position ourselves for the future. We have a strategic profile. What I point out to you in our strategic profile, of those 6 pillars that are listed there, financial strength and operational excellence, highlighting safe and healthy community. That is an absolute goal of the cities. And so that's part of our focus and part of what you saw in that previous slide in terms of funding, making sure we have the resources available to make sure we meet the need of a safe and healthy community. The rest of our pillars are sustainability and natural environment, livable and well-planned development, infrastructure and asset management, and community inclusiveness. That strategic profile, those 6 main pillars, there's a lot of muscle behind that. And if I broke that down for you, I could spend an hour talking about our strategic profile. We, as staff, create about 90 action steps a year, so we're always constantly in motion to make sure we're serving the needs of our residents through these pillars that have been created by the council. It's also important to note, and I think the chief will talk about this, is our public safety master planning. This last year, the city hired a consultant, and we took a deeper dive in our police and fire operations. Again, wanting to look forward. We're very confident in the work that we do. In fact, when we do our community survey every year, we get really high remarks on the work that we do, but we don't take that for granted. And so what we want to do is take a deeper dive into what our staffing looks like, servicing our community, taking a look at growth projections, and I know the chief will talk about that here also in some upcoming slides, looking at changing demographics, looking at the light rail line, all those different impacts that happen in the community, and then making sure we plan for that adequately in the next 5 to 10 years. And then collaboration. And the reason I mention collaboration, it's such an important thing that we do, especially as we talk about tonight about policing and crime. I can tell you that the chief, he works very collaboratively with other chiefs. I mentioned some of the cities here just a minute ago, like Eden Prairie, Plymouth, Edina, Hopkins, St. Louis Park. Our chief collaborates with those other chiefs on all the issues that are important to you. He's talking to his colleagues in other cities. I do the same. I'm talking to other city managers from other cities about these issues. Our mayor has been very active in working with other mayors in those same cities that I talked to you about, addressing crime and working with our county and working with our other cities and working with the Hennepin County's Attorney's Office. I make note of that because there's a lot of moving parts when we talk about crime and policing, and there's a lot of upstream and downstream efforts that occur. And here at the city, what you're going to hear tonight, and what I hope that you leave with, is a recognition of where we have control as a city and what we do towards those efforts and controlling what we can control, and then the collaborative efforts that we have upstream and downstream of law enforcement. So with that, again, I promised I would try to keep it to 10 minutes. I went a little longer. Before I introduce Chief Borboom, we're going to introduce to you to a video first, and then we'll have the chief come up.
Minnetonka is an unbelievable city. Like I said, I've been here for 27 years. I've seen the city grow, and we need to make sure that we meet the needs of our community, and therefore we should be evolving with the community. You know, if I were to police like I learned 30 years ago, today it would not work. And the last 5 years have been not only the most challenging, but we've experienced the most change. I mean, mental health is an example of that. Is, you know, there's an increased need for mental health resources. I mean, we respond to about 43,000 calls for service per year. But you can also focus resources on mental health. Shouldn't be police, but you can have both working for the same common good. I think that's when you talk about evolving. The police officers that we're hiring now are more focused on that personal aspect. And so when they go out in the community, we provide the opportunity for them to spend more time with people in the community to build that trust. Because that one encounter may change the perspective of a person who had a bad situation with police. We have an outstanding police department, very receptive to the changing expectations. People value that, and I think that's what we've done and we'll continue to do here in Minnetonka.
With that, Chief Borboom.
Good evening and welcome. As Mr. Funk mentioned, my name is Scott Borboom, and I have the honor and privilege of being your police chief. I've been a police officer for about 30 years. I started my career in the city of Los Angeles as a Los Angeles police officer back in the early 90s, and I've been a chief for about 6 years. And this, as I said, is a wonderful city, as you all know, because you live here. And so I want to talk a little bit about the police operations before we get into the other speakers here. And just so you know, we are a full-service police department. Relative in size, I would consider us more mid-size, similar to Eden Prairie, Edina, and Plymouth. And what I mean by full service is, while we don't take the 911 call, that actually goes to Hennepin County, everything else is handled in-house. So it's as simple as maybe a neighbor dispute, a theft, maybe property damage, all the way up to a homicide. Our department will handle all aspects of that investigation. There is support by the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office for crime scene analysis, but we do provide full service, which I think is not unique, but it is in some cities unique because we have that talent in-house. And we're broke down into 3 divisions. Our largest division is the patrol division, which is the men and women who wear the uniform, who are out there 24/7 responding to calls for service. Like was mentioned in the video, we respond on average between 40 and 43,000 calls for service per year. That's a lot of calls for service. Our two largest units within the department are traffic, and we have a mental health unit. We have other bike patrol, canine, other ancillary duties, but in addition to the patrol, the folks who are out there doing the traffic, that is our number one complaint in the city, is traffic, and then mental health, and I'm going to comment on mental health here in a little bit. Our second division is investigations and support services. Support services are our records department. Like I mentioned, 43,000 calls for service. We have a lot of data coming through our records division, reports being written, being processed. You may ask for a data request. So they're a very busy records unit. And then we have two detectives that are assigned to Ridgedale. As you know, Ridgedale is redeveloping. We see mixed use in the area, and so there's a call load in that area. And so we've had two detectives at that location for several years, and we'll continue to do that. School resource officers, I'm sure that will come up. We do have two school resource officers assigned to Minnetonka High School. Even though there's concern with the language in the state statute, when I asked our SROs what they wanted to do, they said we want to be in the school. The relationship that we create with these young adults is more important than being out of the school trying to navigate a use of force issue. And so we have remained in the school, and we will. It creates problems for us, I'll admit it. However, like as mentioned, our SROs are dedicated to building those positive relationships in our school. Our detectives process about 4,700 cases per year. When a case is written by a patrol officer, that case is assigned to a detective for investigative follow-up. We have general case investigators, we have retail investigators, but we have about 11 in total. And so that's a lot of cases that they're reviewing. At any given time, they may have a caseload of 30, 40 active cases that they're investigating. Our third division is professional standards. That's a newly created division because in the last few years, the changes in our licensing procedures and our policies has been tremendous. And you'll see that number there. Up until about 2 years ago, we had 76 policies telling our officers what they can and what they can't do. We now have 136. And so that required a lot of oversight. We've been hiring a lot of new officers. So now we have a deputy chief who's responsible for overseeing to make sure we meet all those mandates, make sure our people are trained and trained well. And then professional conduct. We want to make sure our officers are held accountable and doing the right thing. Recruitment is also under that standard. I'll talk a little bit about our recruitment challenges that we have. Community outreach. You hear the word community engagement. That's something not new to us. In fact, community policing has been a term back in the 70s. They changed the word here and there. We realized the need for outreach efforts prior to what happened with the social unrest with the murder of George Floyd. We saw that back in 2016, that we needed to spend more time, more focus on really engaging our community in ways differently than we've done in the past. We've always hosted night to night, some safety camps, things like that, but we really were hoping that all officers in their day-to-day activities would go out and have that opportunity to do that work. The reality is with 43,000 calls for service, sometimes our officers are going from call to call to call. They don't have opportunity to maybe step back and maybe spend a little bit more time with the victim and answer questions or maybe resolve an issue. That really is not a police matter, but yet they're there. And oftentimes, I know from experience, people ask me questions and look for advice, and I wear different hats. But this provides an opportunity for maybe us to spend more time with victims. We also understand that there is a concern with trust in policing in community. And without legitimate policing, we really are going to struggle. We talk about crime. If you have trust and you have legitimacy, that'll help you with your crime. They go hand in hand, and we recognize that as a police department. In fact, last year we had over 140 events just on things like Shop with a Cop, variety of things that you wouldn't even think of that we do to promote that interaction, that positive interaction. Because we don't always want to be about enforcement. In fact, we do very little enforcement. And this is why we focus on community outreach. What's made it a little bit difficult in the few years, and it's not specific to Minnetonka, it's really national and regional, and even somewhat in our own region here, is, you know, the narrative anti-police rhetoric has created some problems for us, not only with recruitment, but we see sometimes we deal with individuals who are emboldened by that. Now, I'm happy to say that we're seeing that narrative change a little bit, but we're still dealing with some of the consequences of that rhetoric. Police officers oftentimes deal with tragedy, sometimes on a daily basis. Most often, people don't call the police because they want to say something's good happening in their life. Oftentimes, something's bad happening, they need help with something. Officers respond to car crashes involving young kids. So daily, they experience trauma. And police have not done a good job with recognizing the trauma that's imposed on police officers on a daily basis. I mentioned before, we wear different hats. We'll point out, you'll see some of the statistics, but of the 40-some thousand calls for service, less than 2,000 involve a criminal matter. So you may ask yourself, what are those other calls for? Well, it could be a neighbor dispute. We oftentimes are called to be a family counselor, a protector, a crime fighter, a health responder, and we have various other hats that we expect our officers to wear, and we expect them to do it pretty darn well. And that's sometimes not an easy challenge for some of our younger officers, but I think they do a pretty darn good job with that work. So with that, we have recognized that we need to take care of our officers. We want them to have a long career here in Minnetonka. We invest a lot of dollars and time, and so we've created a peer support program. Officers can reach out for peer support, speak to another officer from another department who are trained, really looking for that support. We require a checkup from the neck up, so annually we require all officers, actually all police staff, even our non-sworn staff, to visit with a psychologist just to do a check-in. And we do it, we require it. And you may ask, do we get a lot of pushback? Not one person. In fact, every year we have folks that look forward to meeting with our psychologist just to do a check-in, just to see how things are going. We have a licensed therapy dog that's in-house. His name is Samson. He's relatively new. He just wanders around, comes up and checks on you. Physical wellness, we provide workout on duty. Oftentimes the injuries that happen to officers are lower back, knees. As you get older, getting in and out of that car is challenging and difficult, and so we allow them to kind of keep, we're not there to like get muscles, but we're there to keep like lower back injuries and knee injuries from occurring. So we have recognized that, and then also the city. Not only does the police department recognize the need for wellness, it's a citywide initiative. They have a program in place as well. And as Mr. Funk mentioned, we hired a consultant here about 2 years ago to really look at all of our operations. We've noticed, and you've noticed it as well, there's been growth in the city. If you go back to 2010, about 49,000 people lived in Minnetonka. As of last year, about 54,000. The Opus area is where the green rail, the Green Line extension is going to come through, and they've already added roughly 2,500 housing units. They're adding another 2,500. And so we needed to make sure we had a roadmap and we were prepared to what is going to come our way. And with that, they provided a report that gave us recommendations over the next 5 to 7 years. And you'll notice if you look at our budget that there was a request for 6 additional officers in 2024. And that's really to provide extra coverage for those officers, to provide extra coverage during our peak call time. And we want good response time, and we want the ability to spend maybe more time with our victims and try to resolve the issue instead of kicking it down the road. And so that's what those 4 are going to be for. And then we also have the need for a sergeant to kind of help oversee some of those new mandates and policies, as I mentioned before. A traffic officer was added. That's actually funded 100% by the state of Minnesota. And so that will be an officer who works primarily at night, looking for drunk drivers and those that are distracted in driving. Now with this plan, there's flexibility. And so I don't expect to get 14.5 FTEs. In fact, if you look at mental health, that's an area I believe, I hope we can transition from police. Our officers respond daily to issues involving mental health. Unfortunately, there are no other resources to respond. There are limited resources, but you can't call 911 and say, can you wait till tomorrow morning for someone who specializes in mental health? An officer has to go and will continue to go. However, I believe and I hope we can find partnerships with those professionals that can take that off our shoulder, and we can maybe partner more, or in fact, maybe turn some of that stuff over so the police don't have to go. And so what I mean about flexibility is that we will examine each year, and if there are resources in place, we're not going to add additional officers for mental health. We don't need to do that. So that's just one example of an area where I believe there's flexibility, and we'll reevaluate it each year. Because I'm sure you don't want us to keep adding, because it does cost dollars, and we are very cognizant of that, is making sure that those dollars are spent well. Some challenges that we have, as I mentioned already, is mental health calls for service. We are fortunate to have a full-time mental health professional in our building. It's in partnership with Hennepin County. Now, it's one person who works Monday through Friday. Unfortunately, there are need at 10 o'clock at night, 2 in the morning on weekends, and so that's why we have to have officers trained to do that work as well. But that social worker does provide aftercare follow-up. But as I mentioned, we are looking for other partnerships to really pull some of that work off of our officers and get those that are maybe more equipped to deal with some of those issues. Juvenile-related crimes, I mean, that's kind of been what we've experienced here over the last probably 18 months to 2 years. You may know as well as I do that there really are limited resources and facilities to deal with juveniles. And I'll be honest with you, putting kids, incarcerating kids, first-time offenders or various other offenders does not work. I will tell you that. What we've seen, though, is we deal with a lot of repeat offenders, and there are no resources available to these repeat offenders. Parents can't control them, and they end up going right back on the street, and then we deal with them. We're well aware of it. Our partners in the criminal justice system are. We're trying to identify solutions, but as of right now, there's very little resources that are out there available to help us with that. Changing community expectations. Traffic safety is the community's #1 issue, but we also recognize there's a balance. If we go back to the maybe 2014, 2015, we had maybe stopped 17,000, 18,000 cars. Whether it's educating about speed, we're down to about 4,000 or 5,000. We recognize there's a balance, but we also recognize that's your primary concern is traffic safety. You've got people speeding on your streets, running stoplights, you name it. We recognize that, but we're trying to make sure we balance enforcement, education, and the expectations of the community. And then school resource officers, we continue to monitor that. We're hopeful that something changes because as I mentioned, I do believe we still have some issues being in the school, but we're committed to staying there for right now. And then lastly is recruitment. We've seen a drastic reduction in applicants. Unfortunately, we're also experiencing a lot of retirements. And so in 2017, we had over 500 applicants for the position of police officer. Our most recent that closed last week had 24. And we need to hire, we need to hire 1, but if we have additional 6 more next year, you can do the math. It's going to be a struggle. One thing I will assure you, we will not drop our standards. We send all applicants for a psychological examination. Agencies larger than us who are struggling for officers may find a need to reduce the quality of candidate. We will not do that here. We would rather go short than to hire the wrong person, because all the work that we do can be taken away in one bad incident. And it doesn't have to be a Minnetonka officer, as you're well aware. And lastly, I just want to maybe mention, and kind of in addition to what Mr. Funk said, the criminal justice system is a very big system. And we have very limited touch points. And this slide just kind of illustrates where the Minnetonka police have touch points in the system. And I'm going to give an example. We talk about a burglary, but if we're involving a juvenile and we want to do what's right for the juvenile, one of our biggest struggles, or I guess our limitations, is if the juvenile doesn't reside in Minnetonka, we have very little jurisdiction here. So if we're dealing with juveniles from Ramsey County or in Hennepin County outside of Minnetonka, our jurisdiction is at our border. And so while we as a city may have resources, we have no jurisdiction. And that makes it a little bit of a challenge for us. But this is just an example of there's a lot of other folks that have influence on the system, whether it's the county attorney's office, the bench, the judges, probation. And so as I know some of you may be frustrated with the system, it's much greater than what we as police officers can influence. We do a really good job of investigating crime and putting people, holding them accountable on the onset. After that, we have limited control. Now, we're working with our partners more so now than ever to try to fix some of the gaps that we've recognized that have occurred over the last few years. So, but that's just a quick example. There's a lot up there, I know, but we have just a few touch points there. And so I got one more video to show before I introduce our deputy chief here.
Jason Tate, I'm the Deputy Chief at Minnetonka Police Department. So I've been in law enforcement for 21 years now. First walked in the doors here at Minnetonka Police when I was 14 years old as a volunteer police explorer. And after that I worked a seasonal position as a community service officer patrolling our parks prior to being hired as a police officer. So we have really challenged ourselves to try and be more proactive with addressing auto theft. We have automatic license plate readers, or LPRs, strategically placed throughout the city. With that tool, we've also partnered security cameras in those same areas where the LPRs are located. What that allows us to do is when we get a hit on an LPR for a stolen vehicle, we can use the cameras to try and locate the vehicle, monitor the vehicle, and coordinate a response with our patrol officers. There's a product that we put out weekly called the Directive Patrol, directing our officers to specific locations within the city at specific times of day when these crimes are happening to make sure that we are present when the data tells us that the crimes are happening to try and deter it or detect it as best as we can. What I would encourage people to be aware of to make sure that if you do have video at your residence, which many people do, we ask that let us know about that.
All right, if Deputy Chief Tate could come on up.
Let me grab my notes here. Thanks. Thanks, Chief. Like the Chief said, my name is Jason Tate. I have the privilege to serve in the role of the Deputy Chief for the Minnetonka Police Department. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about a lot of what was said in the video, but just a little bit more context to that. So how are we leveraging our technology and training to address a lot of what's happening out in the city today? Some of the things that we're doing, the pieces of technology that we're using, the first one I'll talk about is automatic license plate readers, or refer to those as LPRs for short. We have 13 LPRs throughout the city. We've strategically placed those in certain areas of the city. What those LPRs do is they're cameras, and they scan the license plates of passing vehicles. What it does then is it takes the license plate information and it cross-references it against what we call a hot list. A hot list can contain anything from a stolen vehicle, a stolen license plate, could be a wanted person, or any other BOLO that might be associated with a vehicle. If there is a hit, what that does then is it alerts our staff instantaneously that there's been a hit. It tells them where the hit was, and that allows us to start a response and direct our resources to try and address whatever that issue might be. What you see on the screen here is an example of what an LPR looks like. I'm sure if you drive around the city, you may see some of that equipment out there. And then in the inset in the middle there is the alert that our officers receive. They receive that on their cell phones. It pops up on their computers in multiple different ways so that we make sure we get that information to them as quickly as possible. What we do from there is we use our surveillance cameras. We have surveillance cameras placed in locations to support LPR. So we can have individual pieces of technology, right? If we are not integrating this technology together, it does us no good. So we could have LPRs all over, reading license plates. Without integrating it with surveillance cameras, it's much more difficult for us to make arrests and captures. So what we're doing is we're using our surveillance cameras to support LPR, and it gives us an overhead view to try and find that vehicle and begin coordinating a response. And what that allows us to do is really slow things down. We don't want to rush into a scene, make quick decisions. We really want to slow things down, have a coordinated response, make sure that there's a plan in place for us to address this so that we can do it safely, not only for our officers, but for the citizens and the suspects as well. An additional value of a surveillance camera is it's really good in court. It provides good evidentiary value. It shows exactly what our actions were, what was happening at the moment, and it's really helped in the prosecution of crimes. Another tool that we use is a camera trailer. A camera trailer is a surveillance camera, but it's mobile. What this piece of equipment allows us to do is set up a surveillance camera really within a matter of hours. We can move this camera throughout the city wherever there's a specific need. It has the same capabilities as our other surveillance cameras. It gives us the ability to monitor a 360-degree view. In addition to that, though, what this piece of equipment does is it does act as a deterrent. So you see it has markings on it. It says police. Also on the top of the mast, there's red and blue flashing lights. It also has floodlights and things like that that really helps act as a crime deterrent. And it's been a really valuable tool for us. In the upcoming year, we were recently awarded a grant. And through that grant, we're going to be purchasing a second camera trailer that'll be fully funded through that grant money, which is really just going to double our capabilities and be a really valuable tool for us. In addition to all those technology pieces, we're trying to implement different strategies in our training. So I'll talk, our Minnetonka police pursuit policy is a restrictive pursuit policy. We are only allowed to pursue vehicles under a very limited set of circumstances. What we refer to that is the SHARCS model, which is an acronym. So what that stands for is felony level sexual assaults, homicides, aggravated assaults with a weapon, robbery with a weapon, which includes now carjacking, kidnapping, and significant signs of impairment, which is a DWI. So those are the only reasons that Minnetonka police officers are permitted to pursue under our policy. The reason we do that is because we know pursuits are inherently dangerous. When you engage in a pursuit activity, more often than not, it ends in a crash. There could be injuries. There's danger to the public, there's danger to our officers, and danger to those that are fleeing. So what do we do to try and mitigate that? Well, through training, what we're doing is we're training our officers in techniques to prevent those pursuits from even starting in the first place. The biggest one that we've had a lot of success with is a vehicle boxing technique. You saw that a little bit in the video. You'll see it again in Gareth's video coming up here in a second. But really getting our resources in place, slowing things down with our cameras, developing a plan of action, going in with a coordinated response to be able to stop that vehicle from fleeing from us in the first place. We train that using actual vehicles. Our officers go out and practice this on a regular basis to make sure that we're doing it right. There's not a lot of room for error in this technique, but it is very effective, and it's really has prevented a lot of pursuits from being started here in Minnetonka. If we do have a pursuit that is permitted by policy, our officers are also trained in the pit maneuver, or the pursuit intervention technique. That's where you come up next to a vehicle and you spin it out to prevent it from fleeing any further. So our officers receive training on that as well. In addition to that, we have several pursuit intervention tools at our disposal. Every officer is equipped with a valve stem remover. Kind of unique. It's kind of a new tool to policing and something new that we have found to be very useful. So what that allows us to do is if we have an opportunity to go up to a vehicle, remove the valve stem, deflates the tires, and the benefit of that is it doesn't do any damage. So if, think about a stolen car, that belongs to somebody. We would like to get it back to that person as best we can without a whole lot of damage. So that tool allows us to do that because once we're finished, we can put the valve stem back in, reinflate the tires, and you're good to drive on it again. That takes a little bit of time and coordination to do that. So if we're not able to do that, other tools that we have are stop sticks. So a stop stick is a long piece of equipment that's filled with basically needles in it that are hollow in the middle. So a vehicle drives over that, the needle punctures the tire, the hollow part of that lets the air deflate out of the tire, flattens the tire, prevents the vehicle from continuing to go down the street. So we have a large version of that. We also have a more portable version of that that can fit in an officer's pocket. They can unfold that and deploy that fairly quickly. So those are some of the tools that we use to try and stop pursuits from happening. One thing that we're very fortunate about to have in the Minnetonka Police Department is a dedicated auto theft detective. Not every department has this. This is something that we were able to do through a grant application through the Minnesota Department of Commerce. We were lucky to be awarded that, and what that allows us to do is have one of our detectives fully committed to the investigation of auto thefts and any crimes involving a stolen vehicle. And what that allows them to do is collaborate with other agencies. So we talk about can't do it alone, it takes everybody. This particular detective is so well connected in the metro area that if there's a crime that happens in Minnetonka, we're instantly collaborating with our partners to try and figure out who did it, where are they going, how can we get them and hold them accountable. And it's really been a valuable tool. It's something new that we started this year, but we've had so many positive results as a result of the work that this detective is doing. So that's kind of the training and technology. And the next piece I'm going to talk about is just intelligence-driven policing, okay? If you think about how does an officer go about their business during the day, typically what you would see if you're not responding for a call for service is an officer would probably do randomized patrol. So wherever their particular area that they're assigned to, they would drive around, try and see if they could find something, any laws being broken, go out and enforce that. That works, but what we've tried to do is really challenge ourselves, how can we do it better? And what we're doing is we're really using our intelligence to drive activity. One way we're doing that is through a product called Directed Patrol. So it was mentioned in the video, but I'll explain it a little bit. What Directed Patrol is we, every single week, take a look at our activity and we say, where are the problem areas in Minnetonka? What time of day is this happening? And what's the best way to address that problem? And this is an example of a Directed Patrol that went out back in August, when you were likely aware of the rash of auto thefts that was happening in the city. So what we did with that is we did a little hotspot analysis, and we looked at where is the concentration of these auto thefts happening. And you can see where the red is there. Those are the hot areas. And then we went to the middle of those circles and we identified addresses that we could use to track our activity. So all of these are parks. We don't want to use someone's physical address when we're saying here we're out doing the checking, but what we do with that then is we push this out to our patrol officer and we say, these are the areas where the problems are. This is when it's happening. There's an expectation that you be there during those times when this is happening to make sure that we can have the best outcomes as possible. Another way that we're doing this is through a bi-weekly investigative update. So this happens every Monday, it happens every Wednesday. What this is led by our crime analyst supervisor, who you'll hear from in a second. And this is what we go over. We go over any intelligence updates from Minnetonka, from the surrounding area, anything that's of value. We go over case updates. This incident happened, what's going on with it? Is there any new suspect information? Anything like that. We talk about things from outside agencies, because crime isn't focused to just Minnetonka. So we pay attention to what's going on around us, and we share that with our officers. This is happening in Eden Prairie. There's a likelihood it's going to happen here. Here's the behavior to be on the lookout for. We go over our Directed Patrol during these meetings as well, and it's also an opportunity for a lot of questions and information sharing. So it's, communication's key. We're a 24/7 operation. Our shifts are very siloed. This product is recorded, so our night shift staff that can't be in person can go and view this every single time it comes out to get the information. Our officers need the intelligence and the information to be best equipped to go out and address these problems. So how can we work together, right? We can't do it alone. It takes everybody. There are certain things that you can do to help us as well. A couple of those things are, if you have security cameras at your house, please let us know about that. There's two ways to do that. One is through a program we call SafeCam. What that is you can go to our website, you can enter your information, say, I have a security camera at my house, this is what it looks at, and it doesn't allow us any special access. I can't go in and view your cameras. But if something happens in your neighborhood, I can pull up a map and see, oh, you have a camera that faces this particular street. I'm going to reach out to you and see if you may have captured something that might be beneficial to what we're trying to investigate. Neighbors by Ring is very similar. That's something you can opt into as well. So that's a program where video can be shared. You can talk to your neighbors about different crime incidents. We monitor that as well and can communicate with you on that. There's been instances where we've seen stuff on Ring that we're not aware of, so that gives us an opportunity to reach out and say, will you please call us and let us know about that? We'd appreciate it. So, other things that we have that I want to make you aware of today is we give out steering wheel locks for free. We were awarded these through a partnership with some of our partners at the dealerships. So I have several wheel locks available for free if that's something that interests you. That's a tool that you can use to help prevent auto theft. If you are interested, just come to our lobby and we'll give you one of those. We also have catalytic converter marking kits. What that is allows you to etch your catalytic converter, which helps prevent it from being stolen, and also aids in the recovery. If we do find a catalytic converter, we can say it belongs to this person. It's not legitimately possessed by somebody. If you want one of those, you can come to our lobby as well. There is a little registration that you have to do with that, but those are things that help us. You know, simple things like locking your door or putting a steering wheel lock really do help us out a lot. So those are ways that you can partner with us. I know that was really quick because I'm trying to stay on time here, but next up is another video which is going to talk about which is going to set the stage for our crime analysis supervisor, Gareth Shirk, to come up here.
You know, there's been a heavy focus on how we utilize data. You can have terabytes, you can have stacks of papers. It does no good if you're not taking a critical look at it. My name is Gareth Shirk. I'm the crime analysis supervisor at the Minnetonka Police Department. You know, I like to say we're generally behind the scenes, but we do have a wide-ranging impact all the way down to the patrol officer level.
Theft from motor vehicle update on this slide on the 11th at Lone Lake.
Most crimes we investigate are going to have a digital footprint. A lot of times that's from the cell phone that's in your pocket. Sometimes it's from other computer-connected devices or internet-connected devices. That could be things like cars, it could be your smartwatch.
This is a great example of how we're integrating technologies in order to quickly solve crimes. So what you'll see here are two subjects that are approaching a blue SUV, which is a stolen vehicle. We're able to acquire the vehicle with some of our city-owned cameras that are in the area and coordinate a response, as you see, of our law enforcement officers taking those individuals into custody who are driving the stolen vehicle. What this allows us to do is prevent a pursuit from endangering our officers or our community and take down suspects in a manner that increases officer safety and also increases safety of the public. We have launched this year a public data portal. So that's on the City of Minnetonka's website under the police section. So you can go look at all the arrests we've made, for example, from 2017 on that website. You know, obviously we provide analysis to the chief of police and to our city government, but we also want to allow members of the community to take a deep dive into that data themselves. But it's really about empowering the community to have access to interact with the data, not just us presenting the data in like a PDF, for example. Whether you see us out on the streets or not, there are people that are actively working every single day to keep this community safe. Well, good evening. It's certainly a pleasure to be able to speak to you all. I've been with the PD here, the police department, for 6 years. As we move forward to talk about, in particular tonight, our data, I'd like to provide some greater context to what exactly that means and how we acquire the different data that we use. So firstly, all of our data is collected in accordance with the National Incident-Based Reporting System. So that is a system
that was developed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Department of Justice that local municipalities participate in to report criminal offenses. The National Incident-Based Reporting System has 52 criminal categories that correspond to certain offenses, and those are grouped together in Group A, which is primarily violent crimes and property crimes, and Group B, which is a much smaller subset that generally deals with public disorder issues, things like curfew violations, liquor law violations, things like that. Before 2020, the Minnetonka Police Department and much of the state of Minnesota was using the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System. NIBRS is the replacement of that. Additionally, its primary objective is to capture details of criminal incidents. So I'll give you an example of what happens. An officer may respond to a vehicle theft. Someone has stolen your car. The officer is going to respond, collect evidence, try to hold the individual accountable who is the suspect in the case. The officer will write a report, and in that report, he or she will indicate the statutory offense, what our law says was broken. But it will also correspond to a code that's used by our records division to code that crime in accordance with NIBRS. That information is then electronically sent to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and onward to the FBI. That coding relates to our state statutes and then the greater premise of how all agencies are able to create a unified way of reporting data. So that's one subset of data, and that's when we talk about crime. That's really the subset of data when we are trying to examine trends that are affecting our community. The other pot of data is calls for service. So the Minnetonka Police Department defines call for service as every single incident an officer is going to. As the chief stated, generally we have on average about 40,000 calls per year. Of those, only 1,800 to 2,000 are criminal offenses. So we are recording data from each and every incident, but not all of them are converted into NIBRS data. With that, there's tons of nuances and difficulty. And so what that creates is challenges for individuals like myself and my colleague to explain the data, present the data, and send the data onward. Some of our challenges are technological based. We are dispatched by Hennepin County. So that data is initially on servers from Hennepin County. It's transitioned to servers that we have other partners that manage, and then eventually gets to us. So sometimes there's quality control issues with the data. Additionally, we're bound by various statutory requirements from the state or the FBI and different policy changes. So when you think about crime data, I would encourage you to understand it as living, changing. As investigations move on, we might find evidence that changes what the code is based on new video, new witnesses' statements, things like that. As I mentioned in the video introduction, we did roll out the new data portal this year. I strongly encourage you to navigate to our city's website and check that out. One of the things is that I find most valuable in that is it allows members of our community to interact with. All of those widgets, those little components of the website, those allow individuals to set filters, set dates, times, look at specific geographic areas. So please, I encourage you to look at that. It's really the goal is to empower all of you to look at what's affecting you and what you find important. Just a note on the graphic here on the slide, this is a heat map similar to what was seen on the previous slides. I would note that the areas that have none of these small blobs or hotspots, that doesn't mean it's totally devoid of crime. Instead, what we try to do is, as Deputy Chief Tate mentioned, we try to use maps like these to show where calls are coming in to allow us to deploy the technology in the best way that Deputy Chief Tate went over. So we use this to inform our resource management for both officers' time and also physical equipment. So diving more into the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS, what you see on the left side of your screen here is blue, Group A, as I discussed, the violent property crimes, the majority, about 42 of the 52 offenses, and then you see in the pink the Group B. So that's over 2021, 2022, and then a note on the 2023 column. Of course, we are not complete with the year, so please take that into context that we anticipate 2023's numbers to get relatively statistically close to 2022. As you move to the right, what we did was reach out to some of our counterparts, much like the other presenters. My colleague and myself, we frequently talk to other analysts from other neighboring cities, and we were able to collect data from them to see how their communities are being affected by crime. As you take in that data in the table, I'll just highlight a couple key things to keep in mind. Car theft, that column, is specifically if an unauthorized individual is taking a car they have no right to. So that's what that column is. Your car's parked in your driveway, unfortunately someone steals it. The column to the left, carjacking, new in Minnesota in 2023, a specific state statute mentioning carjacking. Carjacking is the taking of that vehicle with the use of force, whether it's a weapon implied. So those two elements meet in one incident, creating a carjacking. Also to highlight robbery. Robbery is the theft of an item, clothing, any sort of item that an individual doesn't have a right to while using force. So just a couple things as we talk about it, and another example of the nuances that this data presents. Breaking down even further for selected offenses, you'll see on the bottom generally the same offenses that were on the other slide, but broken out by year. The far right column is our year-to-date offenses per offense. So what we anticipate, much like our total NIBRs, is an increase because we're not quite done with our calendar year. That looks like that. So that's a projection of where we think we'll end in 2023. Of course, crime cannot be adequately predicted because it's an individual-based event. If I had an answer to that, then I would be a wealthy man. But we can't always predict it. However, we can look at a variety of factors, and then we can try to project it out. So sometimes these end results might change if there's an offender that impacts us more than usual. Sometimes it might change based on environmental factors, construction projects, things of that nature. All of this data is explorable on that data portal. So I would encourage you to interact with that. I know certainly all the presenters here are excited to get to the conversation portion of tonight's event and look forward to addressing some of your questions. So with that, I will pass it back off to the chief.
Before we open it up for questions, I want to make two remarks. First is we talk about technology, and probably 5 years ago you wouldn't have an agency talking about license plate readers to this extent to the community. In fact, you're going to see at some point on our interactive dashboard our LPR data. We believe we're an open book, and with that being said, I know there may be concern about LPR surveillance. While I mentioned policies, we have very specific policies on the use of LPRs, the use of cameras, and feel free to contact us if you'd like to review them, because we want to make sure they're not misused and we use them appropriately. But it certainly is a use of technology to help us when we don't pursue vehicles. We try to find other ways to recover vehicles, and with the use of LPRs, last year alone, I think we recovered almost 30 cars with the use of that. And those are real victims that are being victimized. And so if we can get a car back and we can do it using the right tools for the right reason, I think that's worthwhile. And then secondly, while we talk about crime data, and if you look at, there's so many different categories, and overall, violent crime in Minnetonka has remained very flat, and maybe even has actually gone down. However, there are certain categories that go up. And if you're the victim of a crime, it doesn't matter if there's one or none, you're the victim, and that's reality. And so I wanted to assure you, even though we believe we actually are sitting in a really good place, we also recognize there's a perception. It doesn't feel the same. I hear from folks that are not likely to walk the streets, and that concerns me. And so regardless of what the data shows, I want you to know your police officers are well aware of the fear and are out there patrolling the streets to make sure people do feel safe, regardless of what the number shows. And so with that, I will open it up for questions. Like Mike had mentioned, Mr. Funk had mentioned, if you don't want to raise your hand and ask it publicly, feel free to put it on a note card and leave it with us. And I do have a mic that's going to come around. I see a hand that was raised. I'll start back there first. Or my helpers. I have people walking around with a mic.
You said that your policies for police almost doubled what policies needed to be added? If 76 wasn't enough, what needed to be added?
Well, I will say this, is that to update a policy manual is a huge undertaking, and we used to keep it in-house. After COVID and the social unrest, we knew we had to really take a look at our policies. I'll give you one example. Duty to intervene. I would have never thought I needed a policy to inform our officers to intervene when they saw something wrong. Okay, I was assumed it was common sense. But we realized that we have to make it very clear that if you see a partner do something wrong, you need to intervene. That's just one example. There's a variety of others. But really, we took a look and we actually hired a company that deals with policies to really take a look and enhance our policy manual. There may be some about court overtime, callback, things that are really not to that level of substance. But that's just one example of what we did. Oh, right here, and then I'll go over here.
Yeah. So my question's about mental health, incidents in which mental health is a factor. So how does the police department work with the Department of Human Services or Hennepin County Mental Health Services to try to train officers and to kind of anticipate trends in mental health problems?
That's a good question. And our social worker is actually a Hennepin County employee, so we have direct access. She's in our building every day, so there's that relationship. Regarding the Minnesota Department of Health, not so much. We don't really work with them. There are certain situations where we may reach out, but within the health system, there's also really some restrictions on data sharing. But because we have a Hennepin County mental health professional, we are able to share. Regarding training, one area where we focus on, and I think this is really important, is we bring in outside professionals to provide the training to our officers. It's expensive, and the city supports it through our budget to make sure that if we're going to train our officers, we bring in the right people to do the training. So we do bring in mental health professionals to provide the training, to give our officers the level of training they need to at least triage and temporarily resolve the issue, knowing that our social worker will provide aftercare the next day. So it works, and it's something that I think obviously we'd like to expand, but it comes at a pretty big price, and I'm hopeful that some other agency or some other partnership will step up and fill that role. Over here. Yep.
Oh, thanks. I didn't understand when you were saying, like, say a juvenile gets caught carjacking in Minnetonka, but they're from St. Paul. So where does that go does that go to the Hennepin County attorney, or how does that work, please?
Good question. So it goes to Hennepin County and the county attorney's office. What I was referring to is that I believe Minnetonka has the desire and the ability to really focus on how we can rehabilitate or provide restorative justice or diversion programs within Minnetonka. If we were dealing with a resident of Minnetonka, juvenile, we have more jurisdiction. Once it ends up in the county, we lack jurisdiction to really encourage what could be the best route for that individual. It may end up in Ramsey at some point, but it starts in Hennepin. Right.
Is this on? Oh, yes, it is. I just had a couple kind of minor questions. I know we were doing the Highway 7 speed crackdown, how that went this summer, or I don't know how long it was going to be. And noisy vehicles, like how do we address those? Seems like we have an excessive amount of noisy vehicles, like where they've added something. And then thirdly, the converters, we're putting codes on our converters. However, we still have the facilities buying the converters. So why aren't we putting our energy at the purchaser instead of the consumer trying to prevent this, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, I guess. I'll turn on here. I can speak to that. So Safe 7 Summer, we talk about intelligence-led policing. The reasons why we did Safe 7 Summer was because the data showed us that we were having the most traffic accidents in the city of Minnetonka along that stretch. So that's why we devoted our resources and directed them to go do enforcement on that. I think we started that on Memorial Day, and it went through Labor Day. And I don't have the exact, it was about 1,000 traffic stops that were conducted along Highway 7 during that 3-month period. There were only a handful of DWIs as a result of that. We did not really see a reduction in crashes that we had actually hoped for, and there's a variety of factors that go into that as well, but hopefully that answers that question. Yeah. Yep, so when that ended, we didn't say, hey, you don't need to do that anymore. We said, you know, although there's not an intensive focus on that, it still remains an issue. The data supports that, so there's still an expectation that they're out there doing traffic enforcement along that corridor. The noise, I understand that. We just had another similar question to that coming from another community member this week as well about the noise on Highway 7 and vehicles out there. And yeah, anywhere, we do our best. The problem is that I need to witness that behavior before I can conduct any enforcement.
So if we have a license plate number that we can present to the police department, they can evaluate and go.
If we can be there at the right time at the right moment. So that's the difficulty with neighborhood speeding complaints, with vehicle noise. You know, with the resources that we have, it's very difficult to be there at the right moment to solve some of those particular problems. So. If you can do that, I will gladly take that and do follow-up for you. And anything that we can get will really help us. Yeah, and we do that. There was a speeding complaint up by Hopkins High School that they had a picture of the license plate. We went and had a conversation. So we do that. So that's appreciated.
Then the last one on going after the buyer, I don't have a good answer for that. I know it's a relatively new law. But, you know, if we had a case that needed some enforcement, we would partner with some of the other agencies that actually do more of that work through Commerce or other agencies that do more of that. And so, but I don't have a good answer for, you know, why we're not going after them.
It's kind of in that same mode of punish Kia because they're part of being stolen. It's not Kia's problem.
Yeah.
The offender's problem. You know, it's like.
I can tell you that there are investigations at the state and federal level to try and crack down on those who are accepting catalytic converters for scrap. There are huge investigations into that. They often lead way far away from Minnetonka. So they're pretty complex cases, but there are state and federal agencies that are actively investigating those rings. So.
Back there?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for doing this, guys. It's very helpful. My question, I have a question and observation. My question on the NIBRS, the data showed 2001, but nothing before. So I think it'd be helpful to kind of see some levels pre-pandemic just to see. And then the other observation was, okay, the presentation indicated that the NIBRS data comes from the Hennepin County Sheriff, right? They're the ones that dispatch you. So we also heard that there was data impacted, the quality of data is impacted. So it just is curious to me that we're depending on data from a organization that apparently doesn't want to prosecute criminals in Hennepin. So just an observation.
Yeah, to your question specifically, well, I'll address your second one. The NIBRS data is coded by our officers and records. The data coming from Hennepin County is just a call type for call for service that a 911 operator is trying to get from a 911 caller. So a 911 caller might call in with a suspicious activity report, right? A member of our community might say, hey, there's something going on in my neighborhood. We may arrive and find that a burglary has occurred. We, as the Minnetonka Police Department, are responsible for coding that. You do make a good point. NIBRS data is effectively displayed for today was 2021 to 2023. The reason we do that is because we only adopted it in 2020, so it's a partial year. So it's very difficult to compare partial years to full years. It doesn't show truly a statistical significance. I will tell you that before that, with the UCR data, Uniform Crime Reporting I was mentioning, we can draw some comparisons between that pot of data and NIBRS. So for example, what we saw in thefts in Uniform Crime Reporting versus NIBRS, so 2018, 19, 20, we saw since that time an increase, right? So most communities have experienced that. So we saw about 450 to 500 thefts in the 2018, 2019, 2020 time period. And as we transition to NIBRS over the recent years, for a variety of factors, we've seen thefts in our city spike to 700, 800s. So that's one example. Car thefts, as the chief mentioned, I think earlier, far more minimal before 2021. So that's a fair observation, certainly. Hopefully that addresses some of your questions.
Well, right here, Nancy, and then back there, I know you had your hand raised here, Nancy.
Yeah, first of all, I was in the 9-week Minnetonka Police Academy, and I would encourage everybody, if you can, that'd be what, in the fall, I think it was, that you're going to be doing that again?
We're working on that.
Yeah, okay. It's excellent. And one of the questions I had was, I said, what percentage of the crimes that are committed in Minnetonka, the people that commit the crimes, do they actually live in Minnetonka? And I believe you said 95% of them do not. Is that correct? Is that okay? So, and based on that, which is kind of shocking because that's something to really think about, but when you mentioned, when I looked at your figures there, Gareth, you said that we have more assaults and more carjackings in Eden Prairie. So I'd be curious, why do you think that is? And you know, does it have to do with who's committing the crimes? But it's just something that I saw with your numbers, so.
You're asking to compare, like, why in Eden Prairie?
Why they're lower, you know, why it seems to look as about half, you know, and I'm just wondering, does it have to do with the first part of my question where a lot of the crimes are committed people that don't live here? I'm just curious as to why there seems to be more.
Yeah, I think, you know, carjackings, of course, we had a very unfortunate carjacking in our city that was traumatic for a member of our community. We did investigate that promptly and have one individual in custody, another that's outstanding that does have a warrant for their arrest. So we're talking about 1 or 2 type incidents. Eden Prairie, I believe, had 0 so far this year. Some other cities have different numbers. So it's difficult. There's a number of factors that present itself to why a carjacking might take place. And it's even more difficult when you have such a minimal number to make any sort of trend analysis or pattern. I don't know if it necessarily connects to the city of residence of an offender, but you do bring up a great point that most of our criminal offenses, 95% or greater, are not residents of Minnetonka, which is a whole nother topic that I think is great that you highlighted, so thanks.
I thought you were implying that Eden Prairie does a better job of policing.
Okay.
I think there was a point here. There is the freeway system, the convenience. Those are all factors. I mean, Ridgedale Mall attracts a lot of activity, and so those all are factors to consider. Oh, yeah, back in the blue, and then over here, Karen.
So I actually have a couple of questions, but I'll limit myself to one on the mic here. Does the city of Minnetonka have any facial recognition software that it uses? And if so, are there any rules regarding its use?
We do not.
Great.
So the camera, the large camera, I think you said you have 2.
Correct.
Can you help me understand? I'm assuming that you would use it for large gatherings. Am I wrong? Can you help me understand under which context you'd use those?
That is correct. I can, you know, if you want to.
Are you talking about the trailer?
The camera trailer, that's.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's multi-purpose. So if you were at Summerfest, you likely saw it there. We do use it for large events, areas that we have no camera coverage in. It's also been in parks, just to, you know, if there's a problem with theft in a park, we'll put it there. Like I said, we can move that thing within an hour, so.
So it's for large gatherings mostly?
Yep, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was a break-in our neighborhood, and a lot of us are wondering, was that person ever caught? There were helicopters, big search. Yeah, so we're all wondering, one was, was this person caught, and was this person watching the house? We all want to know what's going on, because when it hits in your neighborhood, it's like, oh my gosh.
Right. If you want to put your address down on that note card, we'll follow up on where that's at. I would mention that you have maybe noticed an increase in the use of flight support. The State Patrol has helicopters in the air and airplanes, and so they are putting that in the air more often than not. So we do often use them if they're available. And sometimes you may like, wow, there's a police helicopter in the air. It is happening more often, only because it's a resource that's available and it's very effective.
Very quickly, I could just say that Minnetonka Police just does a better job of,
All right.
of identifying crime than maybe Eden Prairie does, so anyway.
Any other questions? Do you have something, Mike?
I just wondered about the power of social media. Is that monitored by the officers or anyone here? You Facebook groups, Live on Patrol, Nextdoor. There's a lot of interesting things in there. And congratulations on the Taco Bell thing. That was awesome.
Thank you.
How quickly that was handled. But is that stuff monitored? Because it seems really important, really powerful these days.
I can speak to Nextdoor. We do not. I don't know the official reason for how they do it, but the platform Nextdoor does not allow cities to monitor. You could subscribe as an individual, but we have no ability to monitor activity regarding the police department with Nextdoor. And that seems to be a platform used quite often. And there's usually a lot of inaccurate information. Yes?
Karen, did you have a question back there?
Okay, right here.
Thanks for taking my question. I'm curious about your the automated or automatic license plate readers. It seems like, I don't know, 1 out of 20 cars does not have a front license plate. So is that impacted at all? And do you ever stop somebody to tell them to put that plate on the front?
We do all the time.
And I'm from St. Louis Park.
Well, I will let them answer that. And
yeah, so when we talk about strategic placement, we take that into account to try and get vehicles going more so away from the camera to make sure that we're catching the rear plates on that. So that is something that we do take into account, and we do enforce that. So.
Would you ever stop people?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Because I'm going to take the plate right off my car, see how long I can do it.
And, when it comes down to those type of offenses, it's usually to say, hey, your license plate's missing. And sometimes people will say, it should have been there, and sometimes they're stolen. So we do just more, I would find it unlikely you'd get a ticket. It's more about, hey, your license plate's missing, you might want to get a new one.
I think we have a question back there. One thing I just want to jump in quick, just to put a little bit more into context about the population we serve. I go back to I think the question or the point made on 95% of the crimes committed are not from folks from Minnetonka. And if you think about more than just our population, so our population is 54,000. One favorite stat I like to talk about when it comes to economic development is the mall traffic. So Ridgedale Mall is the second busiest mall behind Mall of America. We have 1.3 million visitors per month that visit the mall area. In addition to that, we have another 80 plus thousand people that are commuting on 394, 494, Highway 7 that work, visit in the community. And so we have a number of large employers like United Health Group, Cargill. So we have another 80,000 that are just coming in here every day for that. So if you think about population, Ridgedale, our commuters, I think that does kind of answer some of the questions on maybe why a little bit more here than Eden Prairie. It's just sheer numbers. We're just dealing with a lot more numbers. And I think as the chief spoke earlier, we're very aware of the impacts potentially happening with the Green Line. It's going to be a great addition to our city. Yet at the same time, the chief is, and his staff are collaborating with Metro Transit and other law enforcement agencies in preparing for 2027 when it's going to open. So we're very aware of what, about the station, and then how do we plan for and prepare for making sure that area is safe as well.
So we were in the neighborhood that the helicopters visited a couple of weeks ago. We would just really appreciate some tips, and maybe you can give just a few tonight, on prevention and what we can do as neighbors to curb that. And then one night, maybe a week or so afterwards, I saw a police car come into our neighborhood and use the white light sweeping, but was in and out. So I wondered if that was provoked by activity, or if that was just general caretaking.
You know, I can't speak to that specific incident. I will say this, unfortunately, you know, when I first started here 27 years ago, yeah, you could maybe leave your garage door open, unlocked, cars, keys in them. Times are different now, and so if you're asking for tips, most of the folks that come out to look for victims, they're looking for an opportunity, whether it's a door open, garage door open, a car open, things like that. So whatever you can do to prevent that, I mean, I think that is, you know, we see a lot of surveillance camera, and we see individuals will go up to a car, if it's locked, they move on to the next neighbor. We kind of look at it like people are like out there on Halloween going from car to car to car. Once they find a car that's open, they open the car door, they hit the garage door opener, and in they go. And so, you know, if you're asking for a tip, that is one, just to make sure things are kind of locked up at night. Our officers drive around. If they see an open door, they may come up and knock on your door to let you know.
I can speak to this too as well. So I know the incident you're speaking of. I've spoken to a few people in this room, I think, on the phone about it as well. So what you probably didn't recognize was that what you're talking about was highlighted in the video as part of our intelligence briefing that was done. So the activity that you saw with the officer coming through at night, they're aware of what's been going on in your neighborhood, that it's happening at these particular hours, and they're out there trying to see if they can find any particular activity. So that's what they're doing. I can talk to you about the helicopter afterwards too if you want. That is an active investigation. I can't give you a whole lot of details, but I can tell you that Minnetonka police detectives, as well as several of our partners, are very actively looking at that case. So hopefully that answers it. And the other piece I'll tell you about that, so with maybe not your particular incident in your neighborhood, but oftentimes the helicopter will be up, people will take note of that, and then 8, 9 o'clock the next morning, someone will call the police department and say, hey, I noticed the helicopter was up. Weird thing, there was this really strange car parked in front of my house. I thought maybe you would like to know about that. Great information, but even better information in the moment when it's happening. And there's always this misconception, should I call 911? Is it important enough for 911 or not? If you call 911, or if you call the non-emergency number, secret, the same person's answering the phone. Don't memorize that non-emergency, just call 911. They are trained to triage those calls, whether it's an emergency or not. If they have a lot going on, they'll put you on hold and they'll take your call when they have a free moment. If you see something, you need to tell us right away. We'll get the resources and the officers out there to address that. That is the biggest thing you can do. Call 911. Let us know what's happening in your neighborhoods. We can't find out about it the next morning. It really puts us behind. So,
Have enough time for maybe 2 more questions and one right back here.
Okay, thank you. So you said 95% of the people typically do not live in Minnetonka. I'm wondering where they live and how they are getting here, especially when in regards to carjackings.
Well, we don't have a way, if we individually started to track them based on zip code, we just don't have a system in place to know that answer. However, through the work that Gareth does, we know that, especially when we're dealing with juveniles and auto theft, it's not a big number. It's maybe, 60, 70 juveniles that are running around the entire metro area. And how they get out here is in stolen vehicles. And the only thing I'll mention is, 10 years ago when we had an auto theft, it usually meant maybe the neighbor kids are going to take the car next door and go for a joyride. The unfortunate issue today is that we're seeing these cars come out into our community stolen, and they steal our cars, and they commit other crimes, sometimes serious crimes in other parts of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. That's the difference today. But if we can get a handle on these kids and get them the resources that they need and the support, I think we'll make a great impact. And we're working towards that. It just takes some time.
And that statistic of 95% is really derived from what's on their driver's license and some of the other investigative tools we use. I will say, kind of from a perspective of helping with investigations, not very often at all does our investigation lead us to someone that's living in our city. So that's where we are able to extrapolate that data from.
Yep. Time for one more question. Seeing none, as what was mentioned before, we do host a police academy, and it's 8 weeks long, 3 hours per night, and every service that we provide, whether it's their detectives, they spend each night talking about all the work that they do. Again, we are an open book. We have nothing to hide. You can call us. We're creating these dashboards. I mean, you see our use of force, you see our arrest data, you're going to see our allegations of misconduct. So if someone complains about an officer, we're going to put it all out there for people to see. Because we have excellent officers. They do a really good job. We hire great officers. And we know that someday we may make a mistake. But then we got to hold people accountable and learn from it and move on. Because what we don't want to do is lose the trust of people that are sitting here or in our community. Because that's not good. I've seen it, and I can see what happens because of it. We don't want that to happen here. And so if you have an interest in learning more, I'm sure you'll see something come out at some point. We'd encourage you to join us for the Police Academy. I don't know if you have any closing remarks?
So it's 8 o'clock again. Thank you, everyone. I just say again, appreciate you coming out tonight and just spending an hour and a half of your time with us. Hopefully you got some good takeaways. For me, that's in the trenches every day, and I have the opportunity to work with a wonderful staff. I hope you get a sense of the work that we do. Very proud of our staff, very proud of the city. Hopefully you are as well. Thank you so much. Again, appreciate Chief and our presenters this evening. If you have any follow-up questions, again, don't feel free to reach out to myself or anyone that was speaking here tonight. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.